I don't want to mince words right now. There's an old saying that's kind of a curse that says, may you live in interesting times. And we certainly live in interesting times. The fact is, though, that left-wing politics in the United States are at a sort of swell point right now. Especially, it's a reemergence after decades in the U.S. More than likely, everyone in this room knows why that's happening. It's the election of billionaire moron and proto-fascist Donald Trump, and it's shattered the worldview of more than a few people. As such, Americans are openly and quickly moving to the left in droves, and policies such as Medicare for all, free college tuition, and other socialist policies are gaining massive amounts of popularity in the US right now. However, we would be very foolish to assume that all of this is possible with the left in the state that it is right now in the US. And go ahead, clicker. Oh, okay. And that is because we have a lot of challenges that we are facing right now as a leftist movement. While we're at an all-time high for popularity, the mission of left-wing politics is threatened on all sides. Racially, the dream of a united interracial coalition of the working class is heavily undermined by the deep racial resentment in our country, such as was on display at Charlottesville. And it's stoked by an increasingly and extremely reactionary Republican Party. And outside of the Republican Party, you have other wings of the state, such as the police, immigration enforcement, prison system. All of these things are working to divide the working class along racial lines. In the realm of dividing the working class along gender lines, you have assaults on women's bodily autonomy, which this week I'm sure that none of us need a reminder of. And in general, there is an idea in socialism that the reason we don't pay women quite as much as we do men is in order to increase their, decrease their monetary autonomy and increase their reliance on men. And all of these things help to divide us even further. Organized labor, which used to be one of the major bastions of left-wing politics in the U.S., we've been at probably the lowest tide right now than we ever have in our past. This is a glaring loss because the U.S. was one of the shining beacons of militant labor movements in the early 20th century. And actually, I've got here a picture from the Patco strike, which is, we won't get into the history of that right now, but there is a lot of history behind the Patco air traffic controller strike. And you can see here in this graph, this is, a doctored graph a little bit, the scales aren't quite similar. But you can see that as unionization rates have decreased in the last 40, 50 years, the share of the working class, that the wealth in the country that the working class is allowed to have, and actually has in general, has gone down. And for unions that already exist, their rights have been attacked maliciously over the last 2-3 decades, with the cherry on top being the Janus decision that happened just 2 or 3 months ago now. All right. Abroad, the U.S. and its imperial allies are continuing to grind down the global poor into abject poverty and most of the time outright death, or not most of the time, but some of the time. In the Middle East, U.S. allies murder Yemenis and rattle sabers with neighboring states backed by rival imperial powers, with no regard for the potential human toll. In particular, the world has allowed for a new apartheid government, which isn't actually all that new, to be born in Israel at the expense of Palestinians. In the U.S. and in Europe, right-wing voices have been calling for ethno-states as a solution to increasing diversity in their countries. In the U.S., Latin American immigrants, and in Europe, Muslim immigrants. And all of this instead has meant that instead of being a welcome refuge for people who have nothing, we have turned into a place that welcomes these immigrants with child separation, prejudice, and scapegoating. And finally, I think the scariest one of all. We all stand on the precipice of a crisis that the capitalist system is incapable and unwilling to handle. Our industrial mode of production, which relies on fossil fuels, which are toxic to the environment, is causing ecological change on a planetary scale. Left unchecked, the consequences will be catastrophic. Indeed, if our response to weather disasters in the future is going to be similar to what we've seen in recent years, we're talking about a massive upheaval and loss of life. However, there is a path forward, which...
All right, thank you, Wes. Everybody give a round of applause to Wes for telling us about all of the challenges.